People do not respect the person who makes them feel like they are the center of his peace. That is the hard truth. The moment your emotional balance starts depending on someone else's attention, approval, presence, or affection, something inside you begins to collapse, and people can feel it, even when you say nothing. What hurts the most is that you usually do this from a sincere place. You care deeply. You try harder. You give more. You become more available, more patient, more understanding, more willing to wait, more willing to forgive. And yet, instead of being valued more, you are often valued less. That is the cruel contradiction. The more desperately you need to be chosen, the less power your presence seems to carry. This is not because caring is weakness. It is because dependence changes your posture. It changes your energy. It changes your silence, your tone, your standards, and even the way you accept what should never be accepted. Need makes people betray themselves slowly. Not all at once. Quietly. First, you ignore something small. Then you explain away what hurt you. Then you stay where you are clearly not at peace. Then you begin to call your suffering loyalty. Then you start calling your fear love. And by the time you realize what happened, you are no longer fighting for connection. You are begging not to be abandoned. That is why this reflection matters. Because many people are not in pain because they love too much. They are in pain because they forgot how to stand without leaning their entire soul on someone else. And the Stoics understood this long before our time. They knew that when your emotional life is placed in the hands of what you cannot control, suffering becomes inevitable. If your calm depends on another person's consistency, you will live in constant instability. If your worth depends on how often someone texts, calls, chooses, praises, notices, or reassures you, then your identity is no longer yours. It has been outsourced. And once your peace is outsourced, your dignity begins to beg for crumbs. That is where respect starts to disappear. Because respect is deeply connected to self-possession. People may not always understand it consciously, but they feel it. They feel when someone has a center. They feel when someone is grounded enough to walk away from what insults his peace. They feel when someone values his own inner order more than external validation. And they also feel the opposite. They feel when a person is starving for attention. They feel when a person would rather be mistreated than alone. They feel when a person has become too emotionally available to someone who has not earned that access. And let's be honest, this hurts because almost no one teaches you this early. You are taught to chase, to prove, to insist, to over-explain, to hold on, to make people see your worth. You are taught that persistence is noble in every situation. But there is a difference between loyalty and self-abandonment. There is a difference between love and emotional dependency. There is a difference between being open-hearted and being unable to stand on your own. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself again and again that the mind becomes colored by what it gives itself to. Think about that. If every day your mind is colored by who is ignoring you, who is pulling away, who is becoming cold, who is not responding, who is not appreciating you, then your inner world becomes a prison built by someone else's behavior. You wake up thinking about them. You sleep thinking about them. You check your peace against their mood. You measure your value by their effort. And slowly, without noticing, you hand over authority over your own soul. That is too high a price. The deepest mistake is not needing people. Human beings need connection. Human beings need love, friendship, warmth, and closeness. The mistake is making another person responsible for your inner stability. The mistake is believing that without their presence, you become less whole. Because the moment you believe that, fear enters the relationship. And where fear enters, freedom leaves. Then your words are no longer honest. They are strategic. Your patience is no longer peaceful. It is anxious. Your kindness is no longer generous. It is bargaining. You start giving not because it is beautiful to give, but because you hope it will keep someone from leaving. And people can feel that pressure. Even those who are not emotionally mature enough to name it can still feel it. Need creates a weight. It asks the other person to carry what only you were meant to carry within yourself. Your sense of worth. Your emotional security. Your feeling of being enough. And no human being, no matter how loving, was designed to carry that burden for you. So eventually the dynamic becomes imbalanced. One person starts orbiting. The other starts drifting. One person becomes hyper-attentive. The other becomes less careful. One person begins to shrink in order to keep the bond alive. The other begins to feel less urgency, less reverence, less responsibility. This is why trying harder is not always the answer. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stop overreaching. Stop over-offering. Stop over-explaining. Stop trying to convince people to see what they would see naturally if their heart were aligned with yours. There is a kind of suffering that comes from loss, and there is another kind that comes from refusing to accept what is already being shown to you. The second kind is often worse, because it keeps hope alive in places where peace has already died. Seneca wrote often about the dangers of becoming enslaved by what lies outside our command. And that is exactly what emotional dependency is. A soft form of slavery that disguises itself as attachment. It makes you wait. It makes you chase. It makes you interpret crumbs as signs. It makes you confuse temporary attention with real care. It makes you live in reaction. But the Stoic path is different. It asks you to return to yourself, to your mind, to your judgment, to your principles, to the part of you that does not collapse every time someone becomes distant. That return is not coldness. It is not arrogance. It is not pretending not to care. It is self-respect. Real self-respect is quiet. It does not need to announce itself. It simply refuses to keep kneeling where it is not honored. It refuses to keep chasing what only responds when convenient. It refuses to call emotional starvation love. It refuses to keep asking for the bare minimum as if it were a privilege. And maybe that is what you need to hear today. The more you act like someone is your only source of peace, the more likely you are to lose both your peace and your place in their eyes. Not because people are always cruel, but because dependence changes the natural balance of human connection. It tells the other person, without words, "You can do less, and I will still stay. You can give less, and I will still wait. You can respect me less, and I will still need you." And once that message becomes clear, the relationship starts teaching them how little is required to keep you there. That is why inner freedom matters so much. When Epictetus spoke about freedom, he was not speaking only about politics or circumstance. He was speaking about mastery over the self. The ability to remain inwardly stable even when the outer world shifts. The ability to lose something without losing yourself. The ability to care without clinging. To love without surrendering your center. To appreciate without becoming dependent. To walk with others without forgetting how to stand alone. That kind of strength is rare now. But it is still possible. And if this reflection is meeting something real inside you, take a second to subscribe to the channel and leave a like. Not for me alone, but because messages like this sometimes arrive exactly when someone is tired of pretending they are fine. You do not become powerful by needing nobody in a shallow, performative way. You become powerful when your soul stops panicking at the idea of losing what was never fully under your control. That is the beginning of emotional authority. That is the beginning of dignity. That is the beginning of peace. When someone's distance no longer destroys your identity, your presence begins to change. Your words become calmer. Your standards become clearer. Your silence becomes stronger. You stop reaching from fear. You stop speaking from desperation. You stop negotiating your worth. And that is usually the moment everything starts to shift. Not because people suddenly become better. Not because the world becomes fair. But because you are no longer offering your heart from a place of emptiness. You are offering it from a place of fullness. And fullness does not beg. Fullness does not chase endlessly. Fullness does not collapse when not chosen. It feels the pain, yes. It honors the attachment, yes. But it does not abandon itself in order to stay close to someone else. That is the lesson many people learn too late. The person who cannot stand alone will keep tolerating what the person with inner stability would leave behind immediately. And in that tolerance, respect dies piece by piece. So before you ask why people stopped valuing your presence, ask something deeper. Have you been valuing your own? Have you been treating your peace like something sacred? Or have you been placing it in hands that keep dropping it? Because the moment you stop needing others to confirm what you already know about your worth, your whole life starts to breathe differently. The most dangerous form of need is not loud. It does not always look like begging. Sometimes it looks mature. Sometimes it looks patient. Sometimes it looks like understanding. You tell yourself you are being calm, but inside, you are slowly arranging your entire emotional life around someone else's unpredictability. You become careful with your words. You start watching their tone more than your own thoughts. You begin adjusting your mood to their availability. And without realizing it, your peace becomes conditional. You are okay only when they are warm. You are secure only when they are close. You are confident only when they are choosing you visibly. That is not peace. That is emotional captivity wearing the mask of love. And this is why so many people live exhausted. Not because life is always too hard, but because they are spending too much inner energy trying to manage things they were never meant to control. They are trying to control how they are perceived, how they are remembered, how they are prioritized, how they are received, how quickly they are answered, how deeply they are wanted. But the Stoic mind understands something liberating and painful at the same time. The more you try to control another heart, the more you lose command over your own. That is where suffering multiplies. Because once your mind becomes attached to outcomes outside your hands, every small shift feels like a threat. A delayed reply becomes a wound. A colder tone becomes a crisis. A little distance becomes a story in your head. And the story is always the same. Maybe I am losing value. Maybe I am being replaced. Maybe I am not enough. Maybe I need to do more. Maybe I need to become easier, softer, quieter, better, more useful, more available, less demanding, less honest about what hurts me. This is how self-betrayal begins. Not with one dramatic decision, but with 1,000 small abandonments of the self. You start shrinking to remain acceptable. And the tragedy is that the more you shrink, the less respected you feel. Because respect does not grow where self-erasure becomes normal. It grows where there is shape, grounding, substance, and clarity. People are far more influenced by the boundaries you keep than by the sacrifices you hide. They may enjoy access to someone who always bends, but deep respect rarely comes from that dynamic. Deep respect comes when your presence carries inner order. When your care is sincere, but your standards are not negotiable. When your heart is open, but your identity is not up for bargaining. This is one of the hardest truths to accept. Some of the pain you call rejection is actually the pain of realizing you have abandoned your own center in order to be accepted. That hurts more than someone else's distance ever could. Because then you are not only grieving what they did or did not give, you are grieving the version of yourself you became while trying to keep them close. And that grief is heavy. It is heavy to realize how much energy was spent overthinking someone who was giving clear signs. It is heavy to see how many times you silenced your own intuition because you were more afraid of losing the connection than losing your peace. It is heavy to admit that you kept hoping effort would produce reverence, when in truth effort without boundaries often teaches people that your devotion comes cheap. Not worthless, never worthless, but unguarded. Always available. Easy to return to. Easy to test. Easy to take for granted. This is why discipline matters emotionally, not only practically. People talk about discipline as if it only belongs to the gym, to work, to money, to routines. But emotional discipline may be even more important. Emotional discipline is the ability to stop feeding thoughts that humiliate your peace. It is the ability to sit with longing without turning it into self-abandonment. It is the ability to miss someone without making them your master. It is the ability to feel disappointed without chasing reassurance from the very source of the confusion. It is the ability to pause before reacting, to breathe before sending the message, to reflect before reopening the door that keeps injuring you. That kind of restraint is power. Not the kind of power that dominates others. The kind that saves you from becoming smaller every time your emotions get triggered. Marcus Aurelius kept returning to the same essential lesson: you must guard the ruling center within. In modern life, that means protecting the part of you that decides what something means. Because events alone do not destroy you. Interpretation does. Obsession does. Attachment to a specific outcome does. The belief that you cannot be okay unless this person stays, responds, softens, returns, apologizes, changes, or finally sees your worth, that belief is what drains your spirit. And once your spirit is drained, your judgment weakens. Then you start tolerating what your clear mind would reject. You start explaining away disrespect because you are afraid of emptiness. You start romanticizing inconsistency because certainty would require you to leave. You start calling emotional confusion complexity, as if the absence of peace were proof that something is deep. But not everything intense is meaningful. Not everything that consumes you is sacred. Sometimes what feels powerful is only unhealed dependency. That is why stepping back matters. Not as manipulation. Not as a strategy to make someone miss you. Not as a performance of detachment. But as a genuine return to yourself. A return to your own thoughts, your own standards, your own rhythm, your own ability to breathe without waiting for someone else to stabilize your nervous system. This kind of distance is not punishment. It is recovery. It is the moment you stop drinking from a well that keeps leaving you thirsty. And at first, it feels strange. Because when you have been emotionally attached to someone's presence, silence can feel like withdrawal. Stillness can feel like loss. Boundaries can feel cruel. You may even mistake your own healing for coldness, simply because you are no longer overextending yourself the way you used to. But that discomfort is not always a sign that you are doing something wrong. Sometimes it is simply the feeling of your identity returning after being scattered for too long. Epictetus taught that when you kiss something mortal, you should remember its nature. Not to become detached in a lifeless way, but to remain wise. To remember that everything outside your character is temporary, movable, vulnerable to change. People change. Feelings change. Proximity changes. Priorities change. What is steady must be the way you hold yourself through that change. Otherwise, every shift in the outer world will become an earthquake in the inner one. And you were not made to live like that. You were not made to wake up every day measuring your value through someone else's behavior. You were not made to become emotionally homeless inside your own life. You were not made to keep trying to earn what should come with mutual care, mutual effort, mutual respect. Real connection does not require you to betray your dignity in order to sustain it. Real respect does not ask you to become smaller so that someone else can remain comfortable. If this is touching something honest in you, pause for a moment and leave a like, and if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. Sometimes one reflection is enough to wake up a part of you that has been asleep under too much emotional noise. The truth is, when you stop needing people in unhealthy ways, you also stop resenting them so much. Because need creates illusions, and illusions create bitterness. You expect people to save you from loneliness, confirm your value, heal your insecurity, organize your emotions, and protect you from your own inner emptiness. But when they fail, and they will fail because they are human, the disappointment becomes overwhelming. Not only because they disappointed you, but because you had asked them to play a role no person can fulfill without eventually collapsing under it. Freedom begins when you take that role back. When you become the one responsible for your own grounding, your own order, your own emotional maturity. When you stop saying, in secret, my peace begins when you choose me, and start saying, my peace begins when I stop abandoning myself. That shift changes everything. It changes how you listen. It changes how you wait. It changes what you tolerate. It changes what kind of love you recognize as real. Because once your self-respect returns, attention alone no longer impresses you. Words alone no longer seduce you. Promises alone no longer soothe you. You begin to look for consistency, clarity, reciprocity, and peace. And that is a higher standard. Not because it is proud, but because it is sane. A soul that has learned from suffering stops calling instability exciting. It stops worshipping mixed signals. It stops confusing emotional hunger with deep connection. It begins to honor what is calm, what is clear, what is mutual, what does not require self-erasure to survive. That is the beginning of wisdom in relationships and in life. And once you truly see this, you cannot unsee it. You begin noticing how often people give away their dignity just to avoid being alone with themselves. You begin noticing how often they hold on to people who do not honor them simply because inner emptiness feels more frightening than outer disappointment. You begin noticing how often the fear of losing others is actually the fear of facing the self without distraction. But that is exactly where growth waits. Because the self you keep avoiding is also the self that can heal you. The self that can guide you. The self that can sit in silence and survive it. The self that can feel longing without kneeling to it. The self that can be wounded and still remain whole. The self that can love deeply without making love an altar where dignity gets sacrificed. And once you become familiar with that version of yourself, something remarkable happens. People's inconsistency stops defining your internal climate. You still feel disappointment, but it does not own you. You still feel loss, but it does not erase you. You still feel the sting of distance, but it does not make you run after what is leaving. You become steadier. And in that steadiness, respect returns, first from yourself and then from the world around you. Not always from the same people. Not always in the same form. But it returns, because you are no longer teaching others that your soul can be kept waiting indefinitely with almost nothing in return. That lesson ends here. And when it ends, a different life begins. There comes a quiet moment in every life when you finally see that your suffering was not only caused by what others did, but also by what you kept permitting in yourself. That realization is painful, but it is also freeing. Because if your pain came only from others, then your peace would always depend on their transformation. And that would leave you powerless. But when you understand that a part of your suffering came from your own attachment, your own fear, your own refusal to let go, then something changes. Then healing becomes possible. Then power returns to your hands. This is where Stoic wisdom becomes more than an idea. It becomes a way of breathing through disappointment without becoming bitter. It becomes a way of standing in the middle of uncertainty without collapsing into desperation. It becomes the discipline of saying, I cannot control who stays, who leaves, who appreciates me, who overlooks me, who chooses me, or who fails to recognize my value. But I can control whether I will betray myself in response. I can control whether I will keep giving my mind to what destabilizes me. I can control whether I will continue lowering my standards just to maintain access to someone who is no longer meeting me with the same sincerity. That is the real turning point. Not when they come back. Not when they apologize. Not when they suddenly understand what you meant to them. The real turning point is when you stop needing those things in order to reclaim your peace. That is when your soul begins to mature. That is when emotional dependence starts losing its grip. Because dependence survives on hope tied to external outcomes. It keeps whispering that your peace is one message away, one conversation away, one change of heart away. But wisdom says something different. Wisdom says your peace is one decision away, the decision to stop building your inner life on what can leave without warning. And maybe this is the lesson that hurts the ego the most. Some people will never fully see your value, no matter how much you gave, no matter how loyal you were, no matter how deeply you cared. Not because you lacked worth, but because perception is not always a mirror of truth. Some people can only meet you at the depth they have reached within themselves. Some people do not know how to honor what is calm, loyal, and real. Some people only understand absence after they become familiar with access. Some people only notice your worth once you stop placing it in front of them every day. But you cannot spend your life waiting for delayed recognition. That waiting drains too much from the spirit. It keeps you attached to a future moment that may never come. It keeps you emotionally trapped in a silent negotiation where you keep hoping reality will become different if you remain patient long enough. But the Stoics teach something far more solid: accept reality as it is first, not as you wish it were. See clearly. See what is happening now. See what the pattern is. See what your body already feels when your mind keeps making excuses. See the truth that keeps trying to enter, even while attachment keeps blocking the door. Clarity is mercy. Because the moment you see clearly, you stop wasting life on confusion that has already explained itself through repetition. You stop chasing people who only value you when your absence interrupts their comfort. You stop proving yourself to those who benefit from your insecurity. You stop turning your tenderness into a permission slip for others to handle you carelessly. And that does not make you hard. It makes you awake. There is a profound difference between being loving and being available for disrespect. One comes from strength. The other comes from fear. One says, I have love to give, but I also have limits. The other says, I will stay even if my peace keeps bleeding. Stoic thought always points you back to inner alignment, back to character, back to self-command. Not because detachment is glamorous, but because a person without self-command is vulnerable to every emotional storm that passes through his life. And storms will come. People will disappoint you. Some connections will fade. Some truths will arrive later than you wanted. Some losses will humble you. Some silences will answer questions more clearly than words ever did. But your life cannot become a permanent reaction to what other people fail to do. At some point, you must become anchored enough to say, this hurt me, yes. This mattered to me, yes. This disappointed me, yes. But it will not define my worth. It will not dictate my peace. It will not reduce me to someone who begs for what should have been given freely or not at all. That sentence alone can save a life from years of emotional exhaustion. Because so much suffering comes from refusing to release what is already slipping away. So much humiliation comes from trying to hold with force what can only remain by choice. So much resentment comes from offering your heart where there is no structure strong enough to carry it with care. And when you finally stop forcing what has no mutual foundation, you begin to feel something you may not have felt in a long time: relief. Not instant happiness. Not pride. Relief. The relief of no longer performing for love. The relief of no longer monitoring someone's behavior like your emotional survival depends on it. The relief of no longer trying to decode mixed signals to justify your hope. The relief of no longer fighting to remain where your spirit has not been at peace for a long time. That relief is sacred. It is often the first sign that your soul is returning to itself. And when your soul returns to itself, life begins to feel quieter. Not empty. Cleaner. You notice your thoughts with more honesty. You notice how much time was once consumed by fantasies, anxieties, imagined conversations, endless interpretations. You notice how much energy was lost trying to hold together what only existed because you kept carrying it alone. And then, slowly, you begin to rebuild. You rebuild your standards. You rebuild your routine. You rebuild your relationship with silence. You rebuild your ability to enjoy your own company. You rebuild the habit of checking in with your own mind before seeking comfort in someone else's presence. That rebuilding is not dramatic, but it is powerful. It is in the small choices. Not reaching out when you know the impulse comes from panic, not peace. Not explaining yourself for the 10th time to someone committed to misunderstanding you. Not reopening doors that only lead back to confusion. Not glorifying emotional chaos just because it once felt intense. Not calling it love when it continuously asks you to betray your own dignity. These choices look small from the outside, but inside, they are revolutionary. They are the way a person teaches himself that he is no longer available for self-abandonment. And that is where respect truly begins. Not in how loudly you demand it, but in how consistently you live as though your peace matters. Not in how many people admire you, but in how little you are willing to negotiate what keeps your soul intact. Self-respect is not a performance. It is a private commitment. A quiet refusal. A stable inner voice that says, I will love, but not at the cost of myself. I will care, but not to the point where I forget who I am. I will stay open, but I will not become dependent on what is unstable. I will appreciate others, but I will not need them to hold together what I should be building within. If this reflection touched something real in you, write one word in the comments that describes what you are feeling right now. And if this message has been helping you see your own life more clearly, subscribe to the channel and leave a like so this kind of truth can reach more people who are silently carrying the same weight. The truth is, people do not deeply respect the one who cannot stand without them because need distorts the natural dignity of human presence. Need says, I am incomplete without you. Wisdom says, I may value you deeply, but I remain whole within myself. And those are not the same. One creates fear. The other creates calm strength. One invites imbalance. The other protects peace. One teaches others that your center can be shaken easily. The other teaches them that your heart is real, but your soul is not for sale. So do not confuse detachment with indifference. The goal is not to become cold. The goal is to become inwardly free. To care without collapsing. To love without kneeling. To lose without disappearing. To remain human, tender, sincere, and open, but anchored. Always anchored. Because maybe the greatest power in life is not getting everyone to choose you. Maybe it is reaching the point where, even when they do not, you do not abandon yourself anymore. And that is peace. That is maturity. That is strength. Maybe the real power was never in controlling people, securing their loyalty, or making yourself unforgettable to those who cannot value what is in front of them. Maybe the real power has always been quieter than that. Maybe the real power is waking up one day and realizing that your worth never depended on being needed, chased, validated, or chosen by unstable hands. Maybe the real power is understanding that life becomes lighter when you stop asking others to carry what only your own character can sustain. So as this reflection comes to an end, let this truth stay with you in silence. Not everyone will honor your heart, but you must. Not everyone will respect your presence, but you must. Not everyone will recognize your depth, but you must never trade that depth for temporary attention. Because in the end, the most important relationship in your life is the one between your mind and your principles. If that relationship is strong, you can survive disappointment without losing your center. And perhaps the deepest wisdom of all is this. The true power in life is not controlling everything that happens to you, but learning to control the way you respond, the way you endure, and the way you remain whole through it all.